Montana Territory, early spring of 1879. The wind carried cold through the pines and stirred the smoke rising from the chimney of a small log cabin tucked against the Bitterroot foothills. Cassian Duke had just finished splitting the last of the pine logs when he heard the sound ragged, uneven, a wheel dragging across frozen mud. He straightened, axe in hand, and narrowed his eyes at the treeline where the road curved down from the ridge. A busted wagon limped into view, one wheel bent in and the other dragging. The horse looked half dead, and the woman driving it looked worse, pale, lips chapped, hair tangled with pine needles and grit. She clutched the reins with one hand and held something in the other arm. Cassian dropped the axe and started walking. He kept his hands easy at his sides, boots crunching in the frost. The wagon creaked to a stop a few yards from him. The woman swayed in the seat, and her voice cracked when she tried to speak. "I need help." He was at the wagon in 2 strides. "You hurt?" She shook her head, lips trembling. "Not me. My daughter's burning up. I think something's wrong." Cassian peered into the bundle in her arms. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, lay fevered and limp against her chest. Her curls were soaked with sweat, cheeks flushed deep red. "I've got a fire going inside," he said. "Bring her. Now." The woman didn't argue. She climbed down, legs shaking, and staggered after him into the cabin. The warmth hit them fast. Cassian cleared the table with one arm and laid out a wool blanket. He watched the woman lower the girl gently, murmuring to her in a soft voice, "I've got willow bark tea and clean water." "That'll help with the fever," he said, already moving. "Name's Cassian Duke." "You." "Elira," she whispered. "Elira Carson. This is Maylee. My son, Milo." She turned sharply, eyes wide. He was in the back. In the wagon. Cassian spun around and ran out the door. He found the boy curled under a wool coat near the back axle. No older than 8. His face was tight with cold, but he blinked up at Cassian when he lifted the coat. "You hurt?" Cassian asked. Milo shook his head. "Mama said to stay put." Cassian scooped him up. "You did good, Milo. Let's get you warm." Inside, Elira had already tucked Maylee in and was pressing a damp cloth to her forehead. The boy ran to her side the second Cassian set him down, and Elira wrapped her arms around both children like she could shield them from the world. Cassian stoked the fire, poured tea, and brought dry clothes from a trunk in the corner. He did not ask how long they had been out there. He did not ask what sent her down a mountain pass in a wagon that barely held together. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound Maylee's shallow breathing and the low crackle of wood. Cassian watched Elira hold her children, her hand brushing back Maylee's hair again and again. "You can stay here," he said finally, "until she's well. Until you figure out where you're going." Her eyes met his. They were dark and tired, but steady. "We ain't got anywhere to go," she said softly. "Their pa's been gone near a year. We tried for Oregon. Thought we could make something there. But the wagon broke 3 days back. I kept going. Couldn't turn around." Cassian nodded once. He understood what it meant to lose something and keep moving anyway, because stopping hurt worse. "You found the right place," he said. "You're safe here." Elira blinked fast, then looked down at her daughter again. That night he slept in the barn, gave them the bed, and kept the fire going through the dark. By morning, Maylee's fever had broken. Over the next few days, Elira barely left her daughter's side. Cassian brought food, water, and helped Milo with firewood. The boy followed him around with a quiet curiosity, never saying much, but always watching. Elira talked more after Maylee started eating again. She told him she'd been raised in Kansas, married at 17, and buried her husband before she turned 25. "We had land near Dodge City," she said one evening, sitting on the porch steps while the children slept inside. "But the drought took the crops. Then the fever took him. I sold what I could and left. Just wanted to get them somewhere better." Cassian leaned against the post beside her. "You did what you had to." Elira looked at him, her face soft in the lantern glow. "Why are you out here alone?" He glanced toward the dark trees. "Had a younger brother. We came up from Colorado to start a sawmill. He died in the snow last winter. I stayed." Her eyes didn't leave him. "You stayed for him?" Cassian nodded. She was quiet a long moment. Then, you do not seem like a man who should be alone. He looked at her, really looked, and saw the strength behind the weariness, the steadiness in her voice even when her world had broken apart. She was not just a widow and a mother. She was fire held close to the chest. I could say the same for you, he said. A week passed. Then another. They repaired the wagon together, but Elira did not bring up leaving. Maylie grew strong enough to run outside again. Milo followed Cassian around like a shadow, asking questions about tools and trapping. By the time the snow melted, Elira was cooking in the kitchen like she had always belonged there. One night, after the children had gone to bed, she stood beside him by the fire. Her hand brushed his when she passed him a cup of tea. Neither of them moved away. I thought I was done with love, she said quietly. I thought I had nothing left to give. Cassian turned toward her. You were not done. You were just waiting for the right place to land. She looked up, and the way her eyes softened, he felt it in his chest, like something beginning to heal. He reached out and took her hand. I do not want you to leave, he said. Not now. Not ever. Her breath caught. You sure about that? Cassian nodded. I found you in a busted wagon, Elira. You gave me more than I ever thought I would have again. Family. A reason to build something that lasts. She stepped closer, her hand warm in his. I love you, she said simply. He pulled her in and kissed her, slow and certain, as if the world had finally righted itself. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, but inside the cabin, everything was still and warm and exactly what it was meant to be. Elira stood barefoot in the garden Cassian had tilled beside the cabin, her skirts gathered in one hand, the other brushing soil from a sprouting row of peas. The earth was damp but warming, and her fingers moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd coaxed life from stubborn ground before. Milo knelt nearby, planting onions in crooked lines, his brow tight with focus. Cassian was down by the creek, sharpening a draw knife and watching for beaver sign. Maylie, finally free of fever and full of restless energy, darted between rows with a cloth doll clutched to her chest. She'd named it Bluebell. Elira hadn't corrected her when she insisted the doll needed its own garden plot. Every child deserved one harmless dream. I think these'll grow crooked, Milo said, squinting at the furrows. Then they'll be yours, Elira said. Crooked things still feed folks. His smile was brief but real. They ate supper outside that night, cross-legged in the grass with plates resting on knees. A stew of wild greens and salt pork simmered all afternoon in the kettle, and Cassian had brought a sack of dried apples down from the loft. Maylie fell asleep halfway through chewing one. Cassian waited until the children were settled in the loft before he spoke. You ever think about staying? Elira kept her eyes on the dark trees. You mean longer than we already have? I mean for good. She drew her knees up and wrapped her arms around them. I don't know what I'd be offering you. You already do more than I can ask. I didn't offer because I felt sorry for you, he said. I offered because I want you here. I want all of you here. Elira looked over, the fire casting warm light along the side of her face. You don't know what it's like to carry two others on your back. Every choice I make stretches between them and me. I don't get to be just a woman anymore. I know, he said. And I'm not asking for anything less than that. Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. Cassian rose and offered her his hand. She took it, standing slow, steady. He didn't kiss her this time. He just held her hand between both of his and said, you don't have to decide tonight. That night, she lay awake long after the fire died down, her body wedged between her children. She listened to the wind against the eaves, the creak of old wood, the soft rhythm of breathing. It had been a long time since peace came without a cost. She wasn't sure yet what this kind would ask of her. In the morning, Cassian was already stacking lumber for the smokehouse he'd been meaning to build since last fall. Elira brought him a tin cup of coffee and stayed beside him while he sawed. You ever think about what it'd be like to raise a child from the start? She asked without preamble. He paused, rested the saw against his thigh. I do now. She nodded, eyes on the frost still clinging to the grass in the shadows. I can't give more children. Not since Maylie. Her voice was even, but her fingers curled around the empty cup. Cassian didn't flinch. I didn't want more children. I wanted the ones already here. Elira exhaled, long and low. I just needed to say it. Then I'm glad you did. Through April they worked side by side. Milo learned to chop kindling, and Cassian taught him how to mend a bridle. Meili shadowed Elira in the kitchen, learning to knead dough with her small fists and humming tunelessly while she worked. Cassian never pressed Elira for answers, but he built her a rocking chair and set it on the porch facing west, just in case she decided to stay. One evening, after the sun had dipped behind the ridge and the chickens were quiet in their coop, Elira found Cassian in the barn, brushing down the mare. "She's got a split hoof," he said without turning. "I'll trim it back tomorrow." "I want to marry you," she said. He turned then, slow and careful, brush still in hand. "I want the children to grow up knowing what it means to be chosen," she said. "Not just taken in, not pitted, chosen." Cassian set the brush aside and crossed the dirt floor to her. "Then marry me." She nodded once, tears gathering in her eyes but not falling. "I'm not afraid of hard things. I just needed to be sure that love wasn't going to cost me what little we had left." "It won't," he said. "It'll give you more." They were married 2 days later under the pine by the creek. Milo wore a clean shirt Cassian had sewn new buttons onto, and Meili carried a bundle of wild violets in a tin cup. There was no preacher, just the two of them and the quiet agreement of the trees. Cassian took her hands and said, "I promise to build what you need, not just what I want." Elira said, "I promise to give you the best of me, even when it's hard to find." They kissed with the wind in their hair and the children watching wide-eyed nearby. That night, after the children were asleep, she sat in the rocking chair he built, wrapped in a quilt she'd sewn from old scraps. Cassian sat beside her on the step. "I didn't think I'd get this," she said. "Neither did I." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "We made it." He rested his hand over hers. "We're just getting started." By late May, the snowmelt had swollen the creek and greened the hills in a way that made the valley feel like it had never known winter. Cottonwoods leafed out heavy and bright, and the air held the scent of wild plum and damp pine. Cassian had started fencing a second pasture, hammering posts into the soft ground while Milo carried nails in a bucket and kept the mare from wandering off. Elira stood in the doorway one morning, her apron already dusted with flour, watching the two of them work. She didn't call out. She just listened to Milo's voice rising and falling over the breeze, the way he asked questions and waited like he expected real answers now. Cassian answered each one, never rushed, never clipped. That kind of patience was rare in men. Inside, Meili sat on a stool with her doll on her lap, stirring a bowl of cornmeal with a wooden spoon that was too long for her arms. Elira reached to steady it, then paused. "Let her spill a little," Cassian said from the doorframe, wiping his hands on his trousers. "She'll remember more if it gets messy first." Elira turned, amused. "Is that how you taught yourself to carve?" He leaned against the doorpost. "I nearly took a finger off the first time I tried. Still have the scar if you want proof." She crossed her arms, eyes narrowing. "Are you saying I should encourage bad habits?" "I'm saying mistakes are how we learn what matters." She looked at him through the steam curling from the pot on the stove. "And what did you learn that was worth the scar?" He stepped closer. "That it's better to ruin a piece of wood than to never shape anything at all." She didn't answer right away, but her hand brushed lightly against his as she passed him a biscuit fresh from the oven. He didn't let go of it until his fingers touched hers. Later that week, a rider appeared at the edge of the ridge, kicking up dust on a lean bay gelding. Cassian spotted him first, narrowed his eyes, and stepped off the porch. The stranger reined in slow and took off his hat, sweat darkening the band. "Elira Carson live here?" he asked, voice rasped from the trail. Cassian's jaw tightened. Why? I met her brother in Walla Walla last fall. Said she might have come this way. Name's Silas Kettering. I'm a tinker by trade, but I carry letters when I can. Elira stepped out, her skirt brushing the porch rail. Silas. He turned, surprised. Well, I'll be. You look like your ma. You know that? She stayed rooted. You said you saw my brother? Silas nodded. Passed through around harvest. He was headed south, looking for work near the Dallas. Asked me to keep an ear out. Said if I saw you to tell you he's alive. That he's sorry. Elira's shoulders eased, just slightly. Did he say anything else? Silas shook his head. Only that he hoped you'd found somewhere safe. Cassian stepped forward. She has. Silas looked between them, then nodded once. I'll be on my way then. Got a wheel to fix in Stevensville before nightfall. Elira handed him a tin of cornbread. Tell my brother I'm not running anymore. Silas tipped his hat. I'll tell him. They watched him ride off down the trail, dust rising behind. Elira's hand found Cassian's without thinking. I didn't think I'd hear his name again, she said. You don't owe him anything. I don't, she agreed. But knowing he's still breathing, that's something too. Cassian didn't press her. He just stood with her until the rider disappeared into the trees. That Sunday, they walked down to the bend in the creek where the water ran slow and shallow. Melee strung daisies into a crooked chain, and Milo tried to skip stones with more splash than grace. Elira laid a quilt over the grass, and Cassian unpacked the bread and smoked trout she'd wrapped in oilcloth. She watched him carefully arrange the food between them, his hands steady, his movements deliberate. You always this thoughtful? She asked. No, he said. But I've never had someone worth thinking ahead for. She reached across the space between them. You do that without even trying. He took her hand in his. You make it easy to want to. They stayed there until the sun dipped low enough to cast gold across the water, until Melee fell asleep curled up in the quilt, and Milo rested his head on Cassian's knee without a word. Elira looked at him, eyes full of something deeper than gratitude. I never thought I'd be able to trust a man again, she said. Not with me. Not with them. Cassian didn't answer right away. He looked at Milo, then at Melee, then back to her. You didn't have to. You just did. Her lips parted, soft with surprise. You saw that. I see everything you give, he said. And I won't waste any of it. That night, back at the cabin, she sat beside him on the porch while the stars rose in the east. The rocker creaked under her weight, and his arm brushed hers when he leaned forward to light his pipe. I want to build something out here, she said, eyes on the dark horizon. A root cellar. A smokehouse. Maybe a loom when time allows. Cassian nodded. We'll build it. Whatever you want. I want to grow into this place, she said. Not just live here. He reached for her hand, curled his fingers around hers. Then we'll plant deep. And when she looked at him, really looked, it wasn't as a woman trying to survive anymore. It was someone choosing a life, one piece at a time, beside the man who had made room for her in his world without asking her to shrink. June brought heat that settled deep into the soil and coaxed the squash vines into thick, tangled runners. The cabin's east-facing windows stayed open now, letting in the scent of pine pitch and sun-warmed grass. Flies gathered by the porch, and Elira hung bunches of horehound and yarrow beneath the rafters to dry, swatting them away with a dishcloth when they lingered too long. Cassian was carving a new yoke for the oxen borrowed from a neighbor 2 ridges over, an older couple who'd raised 5 children and sent them all west, content now with their hens and a milk cow. Milo had gone with him the day they bartered for the animals, returning with the kind of pride only a boy who'd been trusted with a man's errand could carry. I told them you knew your way with timber, Cassian said, fitting the joint with careful pressure. Elira sat on the low bench near the door, threading a bone needle through a length of homespun she dyed with walnut hull. And what did they say to that? That if you were smart enough to stay, I'd better be smart enough not to let you go. She tilted her head without smiling. They always speak in riddles? They speak like folks who've watched a lot of people make worse choices. Melee's voice called from the creek then, high and urgent. Elira dropped the thread and rose. Skirts lifted just enough to clear the steps as she ran. Cassian followed, boots pounding behind her. They found Meili crouched beside a shallow pool, her hands stained red. For one breathless moment, Elira's chest locked, but then she saw the crushed berries in the girl's palms and the half-made crown of woven reeds beside her. Snakes slithered past, Meili said, eyes wide. Didn't bite, just looked at me. It was a garter, Milo added, climbing down from the slope above. Didn't even have fangs, just stripes. Elira knelt and brushed the juice from her daughter's fingers. Next time, call before you pick anything near the water. I wanted it to look like a princess hat. Cassian crouched beside them. Then let's make a better one. One with willow leaves and feathers. They spent the rest of the morning by the creek, Cassian showing Milo how to split bark without fraying it, Meili darting around with a crow feather stuck in her hair. Elira sat cross-legged on a flat rock, mending the hem of one of Cassian's shirts with thread she'd twisted herself. When they walked back to the cabin, the sun was high and the breeze had picked up. Elira paused at the edge of the clearing. You ever think about the kind of man you might have become if you hadn't stayed? She asked, not turning. Cassian adjusted the willow crown on Meili's head. I think I would have grown quiet in the wrong way. Like a house left empty too long. She turned to him. And now I've got voices in every room. That night, after the children had gone to sleep, Elira pulled down a bundle wrapped in oilskin from the cabin's highest shelf. She laid it on the table without explanation. Cassian unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a ledger, the pages filled with neat, slanted handwriting. Debits, crop yields, birth dates. At the back, a pressed dogwood blossom. I kept the books after he died, she said, her voice quiet but steady. Didn't matter if no one needed them. I needed to see the shape of the life we had. Cassian traced one of the inked lines with his finger. You kept all this? I wanted the children to know they came from something, even if it didn't last. He closed the ledger gently. Then let's start our own. She looked at him, uncertain. A new one, he said. For this place. For this life. She nodded slowly. A place to put down what we've made. They began the next morning. Cassian carved the cover from leftover fur and Elira pressed wildflowers between pages of linen. Milo wrote the first entry, the date, the temperature, and the number of eggs collected from the hens. When dusk came and the stars began to show behind the ridgeline, they sat together at the table, the new ledger open between them. Elira dipped the pen in ink and wrote the second line with care. Today we chose to begin again. Cassian didn't speak. He only reached for her hand and held it there, steady and sure, while the summer night settled warm around them. By July, the earth had hardened beneath the hooves of the mare, and the hills had turned the color of hay. Every morning, Elira rose before the sun crested the ridge, her bare feet cool against the cabin floor as she lit the hearth and poured water from the clay jug Cassian had brought back from the trading post in Missoula. She'd started teaching Meili her letters with a bit of burnt charcoal and scraps of bark. Milo had already learned to read, slow but steady, and now asked to be taught to write things beyond his name. The children sat at the table in the hush of morning light while Cassian fetched water or checked the traps near the ridgeline. One afternoon, Elira found a faded bolt of blue calico buried under the cedar trunk in the loft fabric she'd packed before fleeing Kansas, unused since. She stitched a dress from it during the hottest part of the day, when the sun pinned them indoors and even the chickens took shelter under the porch. When it was finished, she wore it to the edge of the field where Cassian was splitting rails. He looked up, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt, hat pushed back. His eyes settled on her like the breeze had shifted. You kept that hidden, he said. I didn't feel like it belonged here before. He leaned the maul against the fence post and came to her slowly, boots pressing the yellow grass flat. It does now. Elira reached for his hand, her fingers slipping easily into his. I want to hold a gathering. Just a few neighbors. Nothing grand. Cassian tilted his head. You've never mentioned wanting company. I didn't before, she said. But I want folks to know what we are. That this place is real. That we're not passing through. He nodded once. Then we'll make it happen. They spent the next week preparing. Cassian built benches from fallen spruce, and Milo helped string up lanterns between the cabin and the barn. Elira baked bread and dried sweet corn, and Maylie picked wild mint for tea. Cassian rode out to the nearest homestead with handwritten invitations and returned with news that others would come, families with children. A widow who taught scripture, 2 brothers who raised sheep. The evening of the gathering, the sun dipped behind the hills as wagons creaked into the clearing, and voices filled the air with the kind of easy warmth Elira hadn't heard in years. A fiddle played near the barn, its song carrying over the slope. Dishes passed from hand to hand and lanterns cast soft light over the tables Cassian had edged with pine boughs. Elira stood beside him near the fire pit, her hand resting on the small of his back. "You did all this without asking why." "I didn't need to ask," he said. "I've seen what it means to you." She watched Maylie run barefoot with 2 other girls, her laughter rising above the music, and Milo sitting cross-legged with a boy his age, showing him how to whittle a spinning top. "I was afraid of wanting too much," she said, "of settling into something that could be taken." Cassian turned to face her fully. "It won't be." She searched his face, eyes tracing the lines the sun had deepened since spring. "You'd stay even if no one had come? I didn't build this place for anyone else." The music slowed, and someone called for a circle dance. Cassian offered his hand, and Elira took it, letting him lead her into the ring of neighbors. They moved together, not with practiced steps, but with a rhythm built from quiet mornings and shared work, from the unspoken trust that had grown between them. Her hand fit easily in his arm steady at her waist. Around them, laughter rose like smoke, and the sky deepened from gold to indigo. When the guests departed and the lanterns burned low, Elira and Cassian sat on the porch while the children slept inside, worn out from the evening. The quiet that settled wasn't the hush of loneliness, but the stillness of something fulfilled. "I never asked," she said at last, "why you stayed that winter after your brother passed." Cassian stared toward the dark line of trees. "Because I didn't know where else I could go and still feel like myself. And now I know I was waiting for you." She rested her head against his shoulder. "I want to add it to the ledger. Tonight. All of it." He stood and offered his hand, and they stepped inside, lantern light flickering against the walls. She dipped the pen and wrote slow, careful lines. "We gathered with others and gave thanks for what we have built. We danced. We are no longer alone." Cassian watched her write, his hand warm over hers. By the end of August, the garden had offered up its last cucumbers, and the squash had grown heavy on the vine. Elira began drying herbs for winter, and Cassian dug the root cellar they'd spoken of, Milo helping him shovel while Maylie arranged stones in circles nearby, naming each one like a friend. One morning, as Cassian loaded wood into the cart, Elira stepped close and placed her hands over his. "I've been thinking about what it means to be yours." He looked up, the light catching in his eyes. "And? It means I don't have to fight every day just to hold on. It means I get to rest, too." He set the last log down and straightened. "You were never meant to carry it all alone." "I know that now," she said, "and I want to build the rest of our life with that in mind." When autumn came, they pressed apples and stacked firewood high against the cabin wall. The children helped sew blankets from old flour sacks, and Cassian built a cradle from pine, not because it was needed, but because Elira had dreamed of passing something down. On the first frost, they stood together on the porch, arms wrapped around each other, watching the field silver over. "We made it through the hard season," she said. Cassian kissed her temple, slow and sure. "And we'll weather the rest." They stayed out until the stars brightened and the chimney smoke drifted slow and straight into the sky. Inside, the cabin was warm and the air smelled of cedar and bread. Their home was full, not just with children and comfort, but with the quiet, bone-deep peace of a life chosen freely and lived in full. They had come through grief and hardship, through solitude and storm, and on the other side found not just survival, but joy. Together. Always.